Not too long ago, I was shopping in the grocery store and I heard my teacher name being yelled from far away. As I turned in that direction, I saw one of my old students, George, running towards me. I was excited to see George. George had moved away after his 4th grade year with me, and I was really excited to kind of hear about where he had been and what he'd been up to. So he gave me a great big hug, and he shared with me all of his recent successes. But it was what he said right after that that really got to my heart. He said, "You always knew I could." This made me realize the influence that we have over our students, and it also made me realize the importance of building connections and relationships with each of them. George was now a teenager, and he looked back years later and still remembered me for believing in him. As educators, I believe we have the most important and influential job in the world. Our job requires so much and goes well beyond the content. But how do we get our students to believe in us and to believe in the learning process? How do we build their trust to make learning a meaningful experience? Oftentimes we find ourselves asking this question: how do we build rapport and establish connections with our students? Hi, Jamie here from Blue Apple, and we're going to talk about the most important thing you can do in your classrooms, which is create connections and establish rapport with your students. We'll talk about why this is important, and we'll also give you 5 ways to do this in your classroom. The content for this module was actually inspired by a book that I recently read called Culturize by Jimmy Casas. While this book is more geared at building culture in our schools, I actually found it incredibly relatable to building culture in our classrooms and doing the work you do every day. Let's think about this for a moment. Most students will spend 950 hours in the classroom each year. With all that time together, it's important that we establish meaningful relationships with our students. Through these relationships, we begin to see the human stories of our students, and we can use this information to make our teaching more meaningful and authentic. And most importantly, your students will come to realize that their contributions to the classroom, to the world, and to each other are an integral part in making their communities successful. So the first thing we need to do is to strive to be a champion for our students. We want our students to leave the classroom every day feeling connected, capable, confident, and valued. This is the beauty and the responsibility that we have as educators. At any given moment, we want our students to know that we're in their corner. This will help lay the groundwork for building a very trusting relationship. You can evaluate the trust-building process in your classroom by asking yourself these questions. Am I honest with my students? Do I look for and celebrate my students' successes? Do I demonstrate empathy when my students fail to follow through with a given task? And am I impeccable with my word? Secondly, let's come to the understanding that fair means treating students differently. Let's think about this question for a moment. Would we provide our students who have mastered the content with the same interventions that we would for those who did not? Hopefully we answered no. We have learned through theory and practice that we need to differentiate. And if you want to know more about that, you should check out our video on differentiation. When we're able to figure out where our students are academically, we can meet their needs accordingly. And not only are we doing what is right, we're doing what is fair. And we're sending the message to our students that we know how they learn and who they are. Third, let's expect excellence and nothing less. It's really important as educators that we have the mindset that all students should be held to the highest of standards for learning and for behavior. Otherwise, we're unintentionally sending the message that they are not capable of doing so. If we're seeking to build relationships and establish rapport in our classrooms, building that trust implies that we believe in them, we expect their best, and that we truly care. Next, we must let them in. Our students want to be heard, and it is our job to listen. We need to seek out those opportunities to make those connections with them. Remember me saying earlier that we spend nearly 950 hours with our students each year? It's important to maximize our impact. And to do so, we really need to get to know our students personally, their interests, their talents, their worries. Not only does this build our classroom culture, it also helps to build the rapport and those connections in our classrooms. Finally, let's foster a culture that builds student ownership. We want our students to walk through our classrooms every morning with excitement and a personal investment into their learning. We need to build a culture in our classrooms where not only are we honoring student successes, but we're also honoring their failures. It's important for students to be able to feel comfortable in taking risks in their learning, because this shows them that not only are they comfortable in failing, but that failing is a part of that learning process. And through this, students will begin to feel empowered in their own learning. So to recap, here are the 5 ways to build connections and rapport in your classroom. Number 1, strive to be a champion for your students. Number 2, understand that fair means treating students differently. Number 3, expect excellence and nothing less. And number 4, let them in. And number 5, foster a culture that promotes student ownership. Want to know specific strategies on how to make this happen in your classroom? Keep watching. The first strategy I want to share with you goes along with letting our students in. We know that to truly make connections with our students, we need to get to know them. It's important to get to know our students academically, but it's just as equally important to get to know them on a personal level. And we need to do this with intention with each student on a regular and consistent basis. So to do this, use the 1, 2, 3 strategy. This is where you ask one question during a 2-minute conference to 3 students every day. And schedule this on the calendar. The idea of this is that your time with each student has purpose and a focus. And by scheduling this out, you're showing your students your intentional interest in each of them. When our students begin to show interest and value in these conversations, we can know with certainty that we've actually created connections with our students that are meaningful and authentic. So how do you go about setting this up, and how do you build it into your school day? Well, the key here is just to keep it simple. Write it down on the calendar. Write down the student's name and the question that you'd like to ask them. When meeting with each student, be sure to give them your undivided attention. Remember, it's only 2 minutes, so try to remain focused on what that student has to say. If your students are unwilling to open up, try communicating what you want, that question you have for them, through writing. Leave them a Post-it note in their desk or in their locker. And remember, the purpose of this is just to let students in. So any way that you can communicate your interest in them is really helpful. Another great time to use the 1, 2, 3 strategy is when you're working with big questions in your classroom. This is a great time to check in with students individually to get a feel for where they're at and what they're thinking. The next strategy speaks to fostering a culture that builds student ownership. We've all had those students before who rush through an assignment, finishing a lot sooner than we had originally intended. So we all know there are numerous reasons why kids finish early. One kid may have already learned the content, so they finished it with ease, where another student may have not known it at all and struggled through it and just wanted to finish to get it done and turn it in. And then other students, they just simply may have not read the directions to know what they should have done. So either way, we know that they need to slow down that learning process. So we actually call this strategy the slow it down strategy. So the first step to the slow it down strategy is to have students self-assess their work. Read through it with a very careful eye. Then, have them locate the areas that need improvement. Some improvements may be small, like just making the words stronger, where others may be bigger, where maybe they made a mistake in their math algorithm and they have to rewrite it all together. Then, have them organize their new learning into their piece to make it stronger. And finally, have your students ask themselves why. Why did they make the mistake in the first place? They can document this in the margin of their paper, on a Post-it note, or it could just be done in conversation as well. The point here is that they're just recognizing the mistake they made and how they need to fix it. This strategy promotes student ownership because not only did they go through and make the fixes that were necessary to make their piece better, but they also begin to realize that speed shouldn't be a factor when they're completing most tasks. So how do you up your awesome? Click on the download and check out even more strategies, and then tell us what you think. Also, like and subscribe. And keep finding ways to be that Blue Apple teacher, the teacher who stands out.